Well, come on, sit down. We'll sit down here on the wagon tongue or on these bales of hay for this morning's visit with our guest here at the Little Red Barn. It's Mr. Dan West. And for the purposes of our broadcast this morning, about all that you need to know about Mr. West is that you have a big dream, don't you?
Yep. It began over in Spain some 20-odd years ago when I was helping with the Quakers there on both sides of the battle during the Civil War. We were furnishing milk then to hungry children and their mothers, and their lives hung on that. There's some people living now who would have been dead if we hadn't got it done, but this was doing it for them, and I don't think it's the best way. And I got to thinking when I saw grass growing out there and some irrigation system, why not give them cattle and let them work carry their own burden, feed their own children. And we began to get cattle, heifers, first to Puerto Rico. And then it's interesting, the first heifers to go across the ocean were 6 bulls sent to Greece. And that has paid off well. That was back in 1945. And now it's heifers and goats and sheep and hogs and chickens and whatever else that'll help people to feed themselves.
Fire is a very basic part of how human beings have organized themselves and established civilization. Dan West lit many fires in his life, fires that all have been productive and fires that have helped move civilization forward.
Dad was not a person you're going to corral. He would break out of the mold and do his own thing. He had a very high sense of self-esteem, a very strong sense of life, of his purpose in life. And he didn't make any apologies. I mean, I think he would have been very hard to have if you were his boss.
And all of this, I think, folds into his own self-definition, you know, as someone who was uniquely suited to carry out a special mission, which finds, I think, its maybe most complete form in Heifer Project, okay, but it carried over into other areas as well. And it was so strong within him so that then when he would encounter difficulties, you know, he wouldn't let the difficulties get him down. He would always, in his mind, I think, go back, tap into his own sense of mission. He was called.
Among the people in the churches, everybody just responded to Dan. He did have a common touch. I think he was somebody who liked people, and he understood his roots. He understood the rural culture that had produced him. So I think that was probably why that was probably one of the things that contributed to the broad appeal that he always had.
He was a leader in his time, and ahead of his time is one way to put it, but not out of touch with his time. Certainly not out of touch, because he was able to be a true leader rather than just a dreamer. So in that respect, he knew how to bring out the best in us.
Well, how much has been shipped to how many countries so far since 1944?
Well, in the last 25 years, we have shipped to 85 different countries, and almost 15,000 dairy cows have gone overseas. There have been almost 1.5 million chickens, and everything between those two extremes. Dairy goats, as you'll see, and sheep, and anything that will produce protein for the diet of the people is shipped by Heifer Project.
If you go back and look earlier into his life, his experience in World War I, 1917, when he was drafted, that's where he became committed to pacifism.
The whole world thought that World War I was going to be the war to end all wars. This was going to be the last war. And so there was a lot of energy, and he thought that he could help in another way. Maybe he could help with the cooks or the medical team. But then one morning he realized his name was on a list for infantry training, and he knew then he'd have to carry a gun. And he talked with his sergeant and the colonel, and they kept passing him on until he finally talked with the general, who listened to him. And he dismissed Dad with honor and gave him a college voucher. And he then decided that he would dedicate his whole life for working for peace, like a soldier will dedicate his life working for war.
I do think that Dan's deep commitment to peace ran through all the things that he did. It certainly was there in the work that he did with young people, in those camp visits in the 30s, and then of course in the helping develop BVS.
He would go to churches around the country and sort of tease the young people to get them to think about some new ideas.
I think he would regard every social setting as a teaching opportunity. And he was pretty serious, pretty intentional about maximizing those teaching opportunities.
Dan said apparently that the Church of the Brethren should be absolutely fearless, absurdly happy, and always in trouble. We're probably, us older folks, shy away from the always in trouble piece. You know, we're a little cautious. We don't want to offend people. We don't want to bother this part of the church, or we don't want to upset this part of the church. And maybe young people aren't afraid as much about always being in trouble, and they're willing to push the envelope.
He just believed they were the future, that the young people hold in their hands the direction of life. And he wanted to inspire them to think in new ways about making a positive impact on our world.
He was like a Pied Piper, and the young people of that era just talk about following him, how he shaped their thinking and their understanding of what it meant to be brethren, but more than that, what it meant to be a citizen of the world.
More than a fourth of the globe's population suffers from hunger and malnutrition, but many of them children. No one can deny hunger is one of the world's major problems, maybe the major problem. But in this old office tower in downtown Little Rock, there's an Arkansas-based organization trying to do something about it. The headquarters of Heifer International, an organization helping small farmers in underdeveloped areas. Heifer Project also depends on people like Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harper of Hazen. They raise rabbits, and for the past couple of years have sold and donated some to Heifer Project.
Well, we're always hearing on TV and everywhere about world hunger. Well, I think it's a good idea to help people in other countries that can't seem to help themselves, raising food.
The idea of going beyond your church circle, your community, beyond your town, across the ocean, other places, that concept didn't get started until the 40s and the 50s. And there weren't many people doing much of that kind of work before that, I don't think. And Dan was one of those persons that saw the importance of that.
He had this insight into this holistic model, which has come to be what Heifer's biggest strength is. And the people that I'm seeing coming through and saying, there's something about Heifer that really speaks to me. It's so much more than what I thought. And I think that they are energized when they find out how inclusive the message is. You know, it's not just about simply feeding people, not simply hunger issues.
We have grown our program work in Cambodia since 1996, and there are 14 current projects in Cambodia. And what's unique about some of the projects in Cambodia is the fact that the neighbors that are working in a community now once were killing each other during the recent Civil War. And after Civil War, people go back home. They go back to farm in the land that they left. So we bring the communities together. They design what they need from Heifer. We'll be with them for 3 years, maybe more, maybe 4. If they need a 5th year, we will work with them until they are standing on their own, they're sustainable. But the magic is that they're working together. That's the unique thing about Heifer. We're just sort of like the glue that gets it started, or the gel, and then you take it from there. And out of that comes just miracles.
Actually, if we compare our situation during the Khmer Rule regime and the situation that I have now, it's so quite different. Now, with the resource from Heifer, I can use this resource to improve my living condition by earning the income from selling the animal and crop, and then with this money I will it's important, a part of this money will go to my children's education. I will invest in my children's education because I want them better than me.
We want to see a real sustainable project. We want to see a real change in the community, that people will living without hunger and happily and united and helping each other. That's what we really want to see.
The word radical means to go to the root. Radus, that's the Latin root of the word radical. Dan West got to the root of the problem. He understood that if there's human suffering going on here, it's not enough just to put a Band-Aid on that wound. Let's figure out what caused that wound. Let's try to sort it out and see whether we can get to resolving whatever is causing the human suffering at hand.
He saw the possibility for things and was really willing to risk some things to try to make it happen. He asked of himself and his family and his community to act on what they believed, not just make a contribution.
Well, he was visionary, he was magnetic, he was a mystic and practical at the same time. And he was not typical. A moment ago I wanted to use the word nonconformist, but that seems to indicate against something. It wasn't that Dan didn't want to conform, it was that his life and his vision was large enough that it didn't fit.
A Christian is a person for others. Dan West taught that lesson, but what was even more powerful than the words he spoke was how clearly he lived that conviction. He literally gave his life for others.
He was continually, I think, looking for a better way for any situation. Even so, he was grounded to a large extent, and do you know what I think grounded him the most was his faith. He stayed steady to what he felt and what he knew as his inherited faith. It's a Christian, pacifist, Church of the Brethren. And he emphasized that, and it's so cool how this finale of his adult expression, the Heifer Project, Heifer International, is an expression of both of those roots. A commitment to follow Christ and to be peacemakers.